How to become a country legend without singing? Just ask Red Sovine. In a world of golden voices, he became a giant by whispering. He was the king of trucker songs and the man who made America cry with his stories. But his legacy is always controversial. Was he a genius who found poetry in the most ordinary places? Or was he simply a cheap tearjerker? To understand Red Sovine, you have to understand the world that forged him. He was born Woodrow Wilson Sovine in 1918 in the rugged hills of Charleston, West Virginia. This was Appalachian country, a land defined by coal mines, timber yards, and a fierce, unyielding sense of community. It was a world of hard work and little luxury, where life was often a struggle and where stories were a form of currency. People gathered on front porches and around pot-bellied stoves, sharing tales that were passed down through generations. It was a culture that valued a good story, well told. Young Woodrow grew up not with dreams of Nashville stardom, but with the immediate, tangible goal of helping his family make ends meet. He picked up a guitar early on, learning the folk and country songs he heard on the battery-powered radios that were a lifeline to the outside world. The music he absorbed was an earthy blend of Carter family harmonies, Jimmy Rogers' blue yodels, and the stark storytelling ballads that had echoed through the Appalachian Mountains for generations. His first taste of performing came as a teenager when he and a friend, the aptly named Johnny No Knees Bales, formed a band and landed a spot on a local Charleston radio station. This was no small-time connection. Johnny was part of the renowned Bales Brothers, a major act on the Grand Ole Opry in the 1940s. This early partnership immersed the young Sovine in a professional environment, teaching him not just about music, but about the business of entertainment. This was the golden age of live radio. Before television, local radio stations were the epicenters of entertainment. Programs like the Grand Ole Opry in Nashville and the Louisiana Hayride in Shreveport weren't just broadcasts. They were massive live audience variety shows. They were the proving grounds for an entire generation of country music pioneers. For a young man from West Virginia, getting on the radio wasn't just a dream. It was a viable career path. It was in this environment, talking to listeners between songs and hosting his own shows, that Red Sovine began to hone the intimate conversational delivery that would one day make him a household name. He was learning to connect with an unseen audience, not as a distant star, but as a neighbor, a friend you could trust. The skills he acquired here, connecting with an unseen audience, building trust through his tone, mastering the art of the intimate conversation, would ultimately define his career far more than any musical chord he ever learned. At the same time, another American icon was being forged on the nation's brand new interstate highway system, the long-haul truck driver. In the post-World War II economic boom, these men became the lifeblood of the country's commerce. They were seen as modern-day cowboys, lone figures traversing a vast landscape, symbols of freedom, independence, and a uniquely American brand of lonely grit. They were a tribe with their own language and code, their lives filled with stories of the open road, stories that had not yet found their way into the heart of American music. Red Sovine's path to becoming that poet was a long, slow, and winding one. He was not an overnight success. He was the quintessential journeyman, a man who spent nearly 30 years paying his dues in the trenches of the country music business. After his early days in West Virginia, he moved to Shreveport, Louisiana, a city that was quickly becoming a major hub for country music, thanks to the powerhouse radio show, the Louisiana Hayride. The Hayride in the late 1940s and early 50s was a crucible of talent. It was the stage that would launch the careers of Elvis Presley, George Jones, and Johnny Cash. But when Red Sovine arrived, he wasn't the headliner. He took a job as the host of the show and the leader of the house band. He was the man who introduced the stars, the steady hand that kept the show running. It was here that he befriended and became a mentor figure to many of the genre's future legends. But his most significant friendship during this period was with a painfully thin, impossibly talented, and deeply troubled young man from Alabama, Hank Williams. Before Hank became country music's tragic poet laureate, he and Red were inseparable. They were roommates, confidants, and musical partners. While Hank lived in a whirlwind of brilliant creativity and self-destruction, Red provided a rare point of stability, the calm older brother figure in the eye of the storm. He was one of the first to recognize the profound once-in-a-generation talent that Hank possessed. This close proximity to greatness had a profound impact on Red. It wasn't just observing Hank's charisma, it was a masterclass in emotional transference. He saw how Hank could distill a lifetime of pain into a 3-minute song, using simple language to achieve profound results. While Red would never possess Hank's otherworldly, haunting voice, he absorbed the core lesson. Authenticity is the ultimate currency. The story, whether sung or spoken, had to be true to the heart. In a fascinating and often overlooked footnote of country music history, when Hank Williams left the Louisiana hayride for the superstardom that awaited him at the Grand Ole Opry, it was Red Sovine who took over as the lead singer of Hank's legendary band, the Drifting Cowboys. He was literally stepping into the shoes of a giant. The experience was a crucible, forcing him to develop his own stage presence under the long shadow of his departed friend, and teaching him invaluable lessons about leading a band and managing audience expectations. After Hank's tragic death, Red moved to Nashville himself, determined to make his own mark. He signed a recording contract and spent the next decade working tirelessly. His partnership with country superstar Webb Pierce during this time was particularly fruitful, producing a string of major hits like Why Baby Why and Little Rosa. These duets were crucial to his development. On songs like Why Baby Why, Red's spoken word bridge was a standout feature, a hint of the style that would later define him. This period solidified his name in Nashville, proving he was a reliable hitmaker and a familiar, trustworthy voice, long before he became the king of trucker tales. He was a respected member of the Grand Ole Opry, a reliable performer and a familiar voice on the radio. But he was not a superstar. He was a working man's musician, grinding it out year after year. Then in 1965, everything changed. He recorded a song called Giddy Up Go. It was a story, a recitation set to music, about a truck driver who reconnects with his long-lost son over the CB radio, recognizing him by the name of his old rig, Giddy Up Go. The song was a monster hit. It shot to #1 on the country charts and became a national sensation. After 20 years of struggle, Red Sovine had finally found his voice and his niche. The true explosion, however, came a decade later when America was in a restless mood. The mid-1970s, a time of national cynicism following the Watergate scandal, saw the eruption of a massive cultural phenomenon, the CB radio craze. Citizens band radios became a national obsession, a way for ordinary people to connect with the tribe of the open road. Trucker jargon entered the mainstream, and in an era that distrusted authority, the trucker himself was romanticized as a self-reliant, modern folk hero. The culture was primed for a storyteller, and Red Sovine, who had been perfecting this very art form for years, was the right man at the exact right time. In fact, his mastery was already proven. His chilling ghost story of a trucker's ultimate sacrifice Phantom 309 found a massive new audience. Other classics, like the heartbreaking tale of a trucker's disabled son in Little Joe, were rediscovered, cementing his reputation as the poet laureate of the CB airwaves. He wasn't chasing a trend. The trend had finally, after a decade, found its authentic voice. He followed this resurgence a year later with a song that would become his signature, the one that would cement his legacy forever, Teddy Bear. The emotional response to Teddy Bear was overwhelming. The song didn't just climb the charts, it became a cultural touchstone, crossing over from country radio to the pop mainstream and lodging itself in the national consciousness. Red Sovine, at the age of 58, was now, improbably, one of the biggest stars in music. It is crucial to understand Sovine's resurgence within the larger context of 1970s country music. As he was topping the charts with tales of community and quiet heroism, the dominant cultural force in the genre was the outlaw movement, led by figures like Waylon Jennings and Willie Nelson. The Outlaws celebrated rebellion, individualism, and a gritty anti-establishment attitude. Red Sovine was the powerful counter-narrative. In an era of musical rebellion, he offered reassurance. While the Outlaws sang about breaking the rules, Red sang about the quiet dignity of the men who followed them, the everyday heroes who kept the country running. He was the voice of traditional values in a world that seemed to be rapidly losing them. The immense, almost overwhelming emotional power of Red Sovine's songs begs the question, who was the man behind that voice? Was his life filled with the same kind of tragedy that he so expertly narrated? The answer is more complex. By all accounts, the man the public heard on the radio was the real deal. Red Sovine was known throughout his life for his deep humility, his kindness, and his genuine connection to his working-class roots. He was not a man who wore his stardom like a heavy cloak. He was accessible, friendly, and never lost the perspective of a man who had struggled for everything he had. His personal life was not without its shadows. He was a man who understood loss. His close friendship with Hank Williams had given him a front-row seat to the devastating toll of a life lived on the edge, but the source of the profound empathy in his voice may also have come from his own brush with mortality on the highway. Early in his career, Red was involved in a horrific head-on collision that left him critically injured. He spent months recovering and carried the physical and emotional scars of that accident for the rest of his life. He wasn't just a man who sang about the dangers of the road. He was a man who had lived them. He understood the thin line that truckers walk every single day. Perhaps the most humanizing story of all is the one behind his most famous song. Teddy Bear was not a complete work of fiction. The song's co-writer, a woman named Dale Royale, based the story on a real encounter she had over her CB radio. She had indeed heard a young boy calling for his truck-driving father, who, he didn't seem to realize, had been killed in an accident. The story haunted her, and she brought the idea to Red. Red, with his innate understanding of heartbreak and his unique narrative gift, helped shape it into the masterpiece of storytelling it became. When he spoke the lines of that song, he was channeling a very real and a very raw human tragedy. While his public persona was built on tales of lonely highways and heartbreaking loss, Red Sovine's private reality was the complete opposite, a sanctuary of stability and profound devotion that he valued above all else. The undisputed anchor of this world was his wife, Norma Rose Sovine, whom he affectionately called Shug. In an industry known for its transient relationships, their steadfast, lifelong marriage was a testament to a deep partnership. She was more than a wife. She was the keeper of the home front, the quiet certainty he returned to after months on the road, managing the household and providing the consistency their three children, sons Roger and Woody, and a daughter, Janet, needed. This grounded existence wasn't an escape from his career, but the very source of its power. The empathy in his voice was authentic because he intimately understood the profound value of what his characters so often lost: family, home, and a sense of belonging. His immense pride in seeing his son Roger follow him into the music business was about more than professional succession. Sharing a stage was the ultimate union of his two worlds, a chance to be both the seasoned performer and the proud father simultaneously. This unwavering commitment to a normal life was perhaps his most radical act in an industry of larger-than-life egos. It proved the man on the radio was no performance. He was the steadfast husband, the devoted father, the kind of neighbor you could trust with your story, and millions of listeners, hearing the truth of that life in his voice, felt they could do exactly that. Despite his immense popularity with the public, Red Sovine's career was the subject of a long-standing critical debate. This is the central controversy of his legacy, the line between genuine emotion and cheap sentimentality. To his detractors, and there were many among the music critic establishment, Red Sovine was the king of schmaltz. They argued that his songs were emotionally manipulative, relying on a predictable formula of lonely children, deceased parents, and heroic sacrifices to elicit a tearful response. They saw his recitations not as art, but as maudlin, overly sentimental soap operas, the musical equivalent of a cheap greeting card. The criticism wasn't entirely without merit. His stories were not known for their subtlety. They were designed to hit the listener directly in the heart, with little room for ambiguity. The characters were archetypes: the brave trucker, the innocent child, the grieving widow. The emotional buttons were pushed with deliberate and expert precision. To a cynical or sophisticated ear, it could all feel a bit much. To dismiss his work as mere sentimentality, however, is to overlook the reason it resonated so powerfully with millions. His stories spoke a truth that academic criticism often failed to hear. To defend Red Sovine is to defend the validity of sincere, unvarnished emotion. He was not making music for the critics in New York or Los Angeles. He was making music for the waitresses, the factory workers, and most importantly, the truck drivers of Middle America. His audience didn't want ironic detachment or complex metaphors. They wanted stories that reflected the realities of their own lives, the loneliness of being away from family, the fear of loss, and the quiet dignity of a hard day's work. Red Sovine was, in the purest sense of the word, a folk artist. He was carrying on the age-old tradition of the storyteller, giving voice to the joys and sorrows of a specific community. The debate over his work is, in many ways, a debate about class and artistic taste. Is an emotion less valid simply because it is expressed in a straightforward, accessible way? Is a story less artistic because it aims for the heart instead of the head? Red Sovine's enduring popularity suggests that for a massive segment of the population, the answer is a resounding no. They didn't hear manipulation. They heard truth. They heard their own unspoken fears and hopes reflected back at them in a warm, empathetic voice that told them they were not alone. The historical significance of Red Sovine is both unique and profound. He did not invent the truck driving song, but he unquestionably defined it and became its ultimate icon. Before him, trucker songs were mostly about the job, the long hours, the low pay, the beautiful scenery. Red Sovine changed the focus from the truck to the man behind the wheel, transforming the public perception of the truck driver from a simple laborer into a modern American folk hero. with a complex inner life, a symbol of lonely independence and quiet heroism. Furthermore, he solidified the spoken word recitation as a legitimate and powerful subgenre within country music. While others had used the form, no one had ever achieved the level of commercial and cultural success with it that he did. He proved that a compelling story, delivered with sincerity and warmth, could be just as powerful as a perfectly sung melody. He opened a door for a whole lineage of country storytellers, from Johnny Cash with his Ride This Train monologues to the modern-day narrative songs of artists who understand the power of a well-told tale. His work also serves as a perfect, poignant time capsule. His songs from the mid-1970s are an invaluable audio snapshot of the CB radio craze, a cultural moment that has long since faded. He captured the language, the community, and the spirit of that era with perfect authenticity. Listening to Teddy Bear today is like discovering a dusty, forgotten photograph that instantly transports you back in time. But his most lasting impact is the one that can't be measured by chart positions or record sales. It's the deep personal and emotional bond he forged with his listeners. For the men and women who spent their lives on the road, he was more than just a singer. He was their voice, their chronicler, their friend over the airwaves. He understood their loneliness. He celebrated their quiet acts of kindness, and he honored their sacrifices. He created a community out of the shared solitude of the American highway. In a turn of fate that was as poignant as any of his narrated tales, the final chapter of Red Sovine's life story was not written in a recording studio, but on the very asphalt he had immortalized. The profound and tragic irony was inescapable. He had sung of ghostly rigs, of last rides, and of the ever-present dangers that lurked around each bend for the knights of the highway. In the end, his own story would echo these themes with a stark and heartbreaking realism. The day was April 4th, 1980. It was a spring afternoon in Nashville, the city that had cemented his career. Red Sovine, now 61, was driving his Ford van near the intersection of McGavock Pike and Knobdale Road, likely running the simple errands of a man living a quiet, semi-retired life. There was no premonition, no gathering storm, but in an instant the ordinary was shattered. While behind the wheel, he was struck by a sudden massive heart attack. The man who had spent a lifetime narrating stories of control, lost in moments of crisis, now lost control himself. His van swerved sharply, careening across the lanes and crashing into another vehicle. The impact was violent. First responders arrived to a scene of twisted metal, a routine traffic accident that was anything but. Red was pulled from the wreckage, alive but unconscious, and rushed to a nearby hospital, but the damage was too severe. He passed away shortly after, not in a quiet bed surrounded by family, but in the sterile, frantic environment of an emergency room, a victim of the very highway he had made his kingdom. The news of his death spread like a crackle over a CB radio, a shock wave that rippled through Nashville and across the nation's truck stops and diners. The irony was as profound as it was tragic. The man who had given voice to the perils and heartbreaks of the highway had met his own end on that very asphalt. The warm, fatherly voice that had chronicled the lives of America's truckers, their sacrifices, their heartbreaks, and their quiet heroism, was silenced by the very world he gave voice to. In a final powerful testament to his identity, the storyteller of the American road had become its most profound and lasting tale, his own life merging forever with the mythology he helped create. In the final analysis, the story of Red Sovine is a story of quiet persistence and profound sincerity. He was a man who spent decades as a supporting player, before finding his unique and powerful voice. He was a product of the storytelling traditions of Appalachia and the golden age of radio, a journeyman who never lost touch with the everyday people he came from. He absorbed the raw emotion of his friend Hank Williams and channeled it not through a soaring vocal, but through the warm, intimate cadence of a story told from the heart. Was his music sentimental? Absolutely. But to dismiss it as only that is to miss the genuine artistry and deep empathy that lay at its core. You cannot fake the kind of sincerity that Red Sovine possessed. It poured out of the radio speakers because it was real. He believed in the stories he told. He believed in the goodness of the people he described. And he believed in the power of a simple human connection. His legacy isn't stitched into a rhinestone suit, but is instead heard in the crackle of a CB radio on a lonely midnight highway. The trusted voice of a friend who rode shotgun with a generation of drivers, making the darkness feel a little more like home. Red Sovine was the man who drove alongside America, his hand on the nation's shoulder, his voice a comforting presence in the cab. And he left behind a collection of stories that, for anyone who has ever felt the pull of the open road or the ache of a heart, will forever feel like coming home.